Hello internets! So this is a video that I've been putting off making for a long time. It's been something that I've been considering to do for well over a year, and I guess you could call this a coming out video of sorts, even though I technically already did one of those on my much older channel, Keats World. I did come out as gay when I was 19 years old, which was well over a decade at this point. But today I am not here to talk about my sexuality. I am in fact here to talk about the fact that I fall on the autistic spectrum, otherwise known as Asperger's syndrome in my case. I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome about a year ago at this point, which is considered by many standards as a relatively late diagnosis. So the purpose of making this video is not for anyone to feel sorry for me or give me pity. As a matter of fact, if I'm to be completely honest here, I don't feel that having Asperger's syndrome is anything to feel sorry about. But I do hope that by me making this video and by people seeing this video that I can be somewhat helpful, encouraging, or even inspiring to someone out there. But to briefly explain what Asperger's syndrome is, it is a diagnosis on the autistic spectrum. A lot of professionals and psychologists are now regarding it simply as high-functioning autism. And in many ways, it is very high-functioning autism. And yes, it is true for a lot of people who have Asperger's syndrome. We're very mild on the autistic spectrum, so a lot of the times with a significant portion of us, you can't really tell that we are on the autistic spectrum at all, and we don't really have to tell people, but sometimes certain circumstances and issues do come up when you're socializing with friends, relationships, even your relationships with your fellow work colleagues in the workforce and in a whole variety of different workforces. Obviously there's going to be other types of workforces where it's less obvious, especially if you work in an office. It's not really going to be that much of an issue, especially when it comes to the social interaction issues. But that is not to say that there aren't traits that are noticeable within persons with Asperger's syndrome. Some of them are problematic and others are not problematic. For example, the most common trait in most people who have Asperger's syndrome is social interaction. This is certainly one that I do experience. I may come across as quite confident on camera, and in general day-to-day life I do come across as quite confident, but I have learned to manage my social interaction, become a lot better at socially interacting with others, but from time to time I will get very quiet and find it difficult to contribute to a conversation, and which can sometimes turn into kind of that awkward silence that we all dread. Another trait that I tend to possess myself is analytical. Now, being analytical can have its ups and downs. It can be very good in a creative atmosphere. You're trying to create something and you want it to be as good as it can be. It can be a very big asset to be analytical and to analyze your work to make sure that it is that extra bit perfect. Sometimes in certain other workforce industries it's not necessarily the best thing to do, especially if you happen to be working in a very fast-paced environment and you don't really have time to be analytical. It may actually downgrade the quality of your work. And sometimes in social interaction circumstances, being over analytical can sometimes create a little bit of a downer for others who kind of like to approach certain issues with a little bit more of a casual tendency and approach. But the whole analyticalness does tend to lead into perfectionism, which is something that I do experience. I can be a bit of a perfectionist when it comes to, you know, simple things like the preparation of food. Now, I don't work in food service or anything like that, but even when I'm at home and there is a certain perfectionism I expect when I'm eating food. It has to look a certain way, it has to have a certain type of texture, it has to be accompanied with certain types of foods, and I can be a bit of a perfectionist with that. I can be a perfectionist with my clothes. They have to be ironed perfectly. I can be a perfectionist with a whole other range of issues that would be quite trivial to a lot of people, but they are important to me, and I guess it's kind of a form of self-pride in a way. but it's very much a trait, a perfectionist trait that Asperger's people tend to experience. And then there is fondness of routine. Now, I do have a fondness of routine to a certain extent, not to an extreme extent. I usually have the routine of having a shower the second I wake up. You know, some people like to sort of, have some breakfast and iron their clothes or whatever, and then have their shower. I have to have my shower the second I wake up. It is part of my routine, and it has to happen. And obviously, when I come home from work, I have a routine of computer time. When I come home, that is my computer time, and I have to be at the computer. That is my routine, and I tend not to go watch Netflix or TV. It is internet time, and that is kind of my thing. And that's, I tend to sort of stick to that and rarely waver from that. But from time to time, if work schedule changes, I will do what I have to do to be up at a certain time and that type of thing, and that doesn't really bother me at all, because I think the fondness of routine is not as extreme with me as it might be with others. Now, there's other Asperger's persons who will deal with other issues that I don't tend to deal with at all myself, like some Asperger's people, and even people who are higher up on the autistic spectrum, do not like to be touched. There are others who have high sensitivity to light and sound and touch. I tend not to experience these issues at all. Certain foods some people don't like because of the texture. I guess you could kind of say that with me with certain foods, but because they're not really foods that I would even think about eating anyway, I just kind of tend to forget about it. Stuff like pineapple and melons, I tend not to eat them because I don't like the texture of them. I think the texture is kind of, I don't know, it's just weird, so I don't eat them. But other than that, that's not really something that crosses my mind. It's not really an issue for me. There's other Asperger's people who don't like crowds. Sometimes I kind of get that. I kind of experience that. It's very rare that I will get overwhelmed by crowds, unless it's really insane, over the top crowds, but generally it's a really non-issue for me. So in terms of coming to terms with being Asperger's, when it was pointed out to me that there is a very good chance that I have Asperger's, I did a little bit of searching around on the internet, and I came across Aspire Ireland. So I gave Aspire Ireland a call, asked them for some advice. They gave me a list of psychologists that I could call, and they gave me a list of support groups. It took me a while to give myself the relevant push to actually go ahead and book an appointment with a private practice psychologist, who then asked me a whole series of questions to determine if I have Asperger's syndrome or if I don't. And he asked me a whole series of questions regarding social interaction, if I was bullied at school, if I talk in a particular way, which is something some people with Asperger's syndrome do. There are Asperger's people that have special interests. So if you've got an Asperger's syndrome person who has a special interest in American movies, and they watch an awful lot of American movies and TV shows, sometimes if they're not American, they will have somewhat of a twang on their accent, and it will sound kind of Americanish, even though the person may not necessarily be American themselves. So that was a question I was asked: do you ever have an exaggerated accent, either exaggerated in a British or an American way? Sometimes I do. Early on when I was making videos, sometimes it has a slight American twang to it. It's something that I don't necessarily, I'm not really conscious of, and it's something that I do. I don't fully understand it. It's just something that happens. I don't really think about it one way or the other. It's just one of those things. It's not really that big of a deal. And then, to reassure me, he talked about all of these support groups that I could join. He talked about books that I could read. He talked about some very notable, intelligent individuals throughout history, including Albert Einstein himself, who have had Asperger's syndrome. He commended me for being so manageable with the syndrome itself, which was which was pretty cool of him. Overall, it was a pleasant experience, and he diagnosed me with mild Asperger's syndrome. So from there, I went back to the list of support groups for persons with Asperger's syndrome. I contacted one or two of them, and then I decided to go with one of them that is actually in the city centre, so it's close by from work, so it's easy for me to walk directly from work on the day that it's on. And overall, I have to say that it has been a very, very positive experience just listening to other people who have Asperger's syndrome. It is very encouraging. Basically ensures you that you are not alone. I know that sounds incredibly cheesy, but it's true. It does. It does really it assure you that you are not the only person who is like what you are like. Not that I'm trying to trump away individuality or anything like that, but shared experiences do help an awful lot with coming to terms with being Asperger's. So one of my friends from the support group invited me to come along to interviews that were being held by Aspire Ireland for a media project that they're doing based on Asperger's syndrome. So I went along, I did the interviews, and they went really well. And I have to say, I actually learned quite a lot about myself from just talking to a camera for, I think it was like 20 to 30 minutes or something like that. It was one of the longer interviews, even though I do this all the time on YouTube. But this experience of just interacting with an interviewer, it was really quite positive, and I really learned quite a lot about myself from that. So it was really sort of delves right into your psyche in a good way. So that was a positive experience, and then from that I was asked if I would come on to the media project that Aspire Ireland are doing. Now I can't really talk about the specifics of that. All I can say is it is a media project that is relevant to Asperger's syndrome. I suppose the last thing I could reflect upon in regards to having Asperger's syndrome is understanding my full potential. I do regard myself as quite a creative person. When I was younger, I did study theatre for quite a lot, and after a while nothing really came from that, and that's fine. But in recent years I've developed quite a taste for writing. And for a very long time I wanted to write a science fiction novel, and I never took the initiative to actually do that. But after my diagnosis and hearing about all of these great, wonderful, creative and intelligent individuals, that in of itself kind of inspired me to just do it and to believe that I can do it. And I have been doing so. I have been writing my science fiction novel, and I'm constantly getting new ideas all the time, and I'm understanding the process of writing a lot better, and I'm really enjoying it. I have this positive confidence about it. In many ways I think I've actually become a stronger and more confident individual since I've been diagnosed, and I think it's made me a better person as well. I know that sounds really cheesy, but that is truly how I feel about it. So all in all, coming to terms with having Asperger's syndrome has been a very positive experience for me, and I hope that anyone who is watching this, it can be a positive experience for you, and you can use many of your traits as an advantage. It doesn't have to be a total downer. It can be very much a positive thing to just embrace who you are and accept who you are. Embrace your individuality.